When we talk about free will, and when we get really heated debates over that, what we're actually talking about is human behavior. If we all held the exact same idea and it was the wrong idea, that would be detrimental. And so having this debate and having ideas kind of develop is the thing we want to do.
In the late 80s, early 90s, I came to realize that people from the different areas of neuroscience, psychology, biology didn't really talk to each other. And it seemed to me that's a major loss because each of them had something to say that could be useful to the other. The first roundtable, we had actors, philosophers, neuroscientists. I invited them to my home. I served them dinner and wine. Then we went to my living room, and what I recognized was that these meetings in and of themselves were extremely enlightening. And so that's where Helix comes from.
The mission of Helix is to bring together thought leaders from different disciplines, speaking with one another in spontaneous a way as possible.
The discussions are not aimed to answer a question, because if that were the case, there would be more homogeneity and you'd have a monolithic group of experts. And it's just the opposite. It's more of an intellectual free-for-all.
It's true in different ways at different phases of child development, but what preoccupies a kid at a certain stage in life is going to influence what he or she actually experiences. We all know that. If we're in a terrible mood, if something horrible just happened to us, we misperceive what someone else said.
I don't think we're, in some sense, moving toward a steady state of objectivity. You disagree? Go ahead.
I think you never get to a stage of objectivity. There's no such thing.
Right.
But I think kids are more limited because they have more limited minds.
That's what you get in an interdisciplinary conversation. You get to realize that there's no one privileged point of view or one privileged kind of information. So I think it's essential if we're going to understand anything about the world.
I'm a lab scientist, and being a lab scientist, I spend a lot of time in the four walls of my laboratory. So when you have an opportunity to sit around with colleagues who are coming from very different perspectives, it changes the way you think about your subject matter in a way that I hope I will then take back into my laboratory and import some of those different perspectives into the work that we do there.
We cover a very broad area. We do neuroscience, biology, medicine. We had Urdu poetry, surrealism, and there isn't a meeting I walk out of that I haven't learned something.
It's very important to see how carefully the child has made an effort to draw these figures. And now if we go to the next child's drawing, same age, it's very primitive.
How do you determine the ability of the child drawing against his or her creativity or individuality? It seems to me you're making an assumption that drawing ability of all children of the same age ought to be the same.
I'm so glad you made that point. So what you're suggesting is that that image, which I plead guilty to calling primitive, what could in fact be an amazingly creative expression on the part of a child who could have possibly drawn the figure in other ways. It might not be right to call it primitive. It might be right to call it something else. So I appreciate that so much, and I plead guilty and I stand corrected. And I think it's a wonderful contribution.
Thank you.
We had a series on music and cognition. We asked Nacho Aramani, a percussionist, to give a performance where he engaged not only all of the roundtable participants, but the entire audience.
The John Templeton Foundation, many of the subjects they're interested in, we are interested in.
So genius requires intelligence, but then there's something else. And originally the idea was that, that genius, that extra something, was breathed into you by a god or a muse, or implanted in you by the gods. But it was a divine, special something that ordinary human beings didn't have.
We submitted an application identifying 14 areas within the big questions about sciences and humanities.
And we were very pleased for them to fund us for those.
It's when we get puzzling phenomena, that is observable physical phenomena, that our current inventory, our physical inventory of properties and forces doesn't seem adequate to capture, that we then are led to broaden out our physical understandings. In the case of consciousness, it's not the behavior of consciousness that leads us to think we're going to need some new fundamental explanatory principle. It's the intrinsic character. Is it epiphenomenal? That is it such that it's just there?
There's an interesting form of overstatement that scientists are prone to in this, that we have biology and we have a mechanism by which you can see how random variation plus natural selection could give you complicated organisms like us. That's true. What you often see scientists do is convert that into a very different statement, which is, we know that random mutations plus natural selection gave rise to us. Those are two very different statements, and the second one is completely beyond what we know. Of course, we don't know that all those mutations were random. We have no idea.
With the John Templeton Foundation grant, we had one about immortality that I thought was really enchanting and nerve-wracking.
If we were to be able to say on such and such a date, this will be the end of the human race, what would that do to all human endeavor? We can accept to a certain extent the fact that we individually, each one of us, is going to end. But the idea that the entire thing is going to end, all humanity, I think is as close to unthinkable as we can get.
I feel like we've changed a great deal in this recent period of time since modernity, basically. There are sensibilities that are arising, and not just in academic frameworks, but in the popular realm as well, that would say it might be possible to accept endings, accept one's own death, accept the kind of deep uncertainty of our existence, that might be kind of cool,
It was just a discussion, but you did in some way feel that something really large was at stake.
There will always be an irreducible degree of unpredictability of human behavior, even given all the addictions, even given all the neurological conditions that people have. There is an element of choice in humans which is inherent to that human for one reason or another.
We know the better, we do the worse.
Well, I think it's also...
These events really democratize the intellectual life in the city. I think it's very important not to restrict ideas to elites in universities.
We have an audience here, and we simulcast it, and we put it on YouTube, and that way a lot more people can benefit from it.
A lot of you have been talking about the fact that when we are conscious, we have a feeling inside, that we have an experience inside. So my question is, inside what? Because if we say that conscious experience is inside the mind, it's kind of circular definition, because just the thing, so it cannot be literally inside the head. We do not expect to find consciousness like we find sugar in the blood. So I just wanted to ask, inside what?
Well, something we haven't really talked at all about, which I guess we'll wait till the last minute to throw it out there, is that consciousness is, as far as we know, embodied. When I stub my toe, I feel pain in my toe, not in my brain, and I don't feel it in the rock that I stubbed my toe against. There seems to be this deep interface of consciousness that blends into the body, even though we've been talking about it being situated in the brain. And so when you ask the question, we've been talking about consciousness being inside what? The first thing I think of is it's inside the body. And that gets us out of that immediate circularity. And then you can say, well, what is the consciousness, the embodied consciousness inside of? And then that's a different question.
Do you think that if given unlimited resources and the ultimate proficiency in algorithms. Could we create a machine that's capable of replicating itself enough to become free-willing?
I really like that each of the panelists really just talked about their own experiences with the topic in question from their own approaches. And that really gave like a multifaceted understanding to the questions.
My hope is to provide this to various universities around the country and around the world, especially in lesser fortunate places around the world.
I've always been in favor of independent thinking and critical thinking. This is a perfect way to bring it to as many people as possible.
These kinds of events remind us all in academia that it is really about relevance of what we are doing. It is ultimately the question, how do we contribute to the betterment of society or to the greater good?
The more individuals who can engage in this kind of high-quality discussion, the more we're raising not only the awareness, but the potential for contributions of people, both participants and non-participants, to the greater wisdom and knowledge of the world.